Hello, everybody. I have to say today, Saber em Movimento will be in English, and we are talking with Thomas Cauvin. And Thomas, thank you to be here. And I have to say to you and to the people who are watching us because of the English, because of the talk, and because of you too. But we have to say that saber em movimento is something knowledge in movement. Let's do a kind of translation, a fast translation here. And also to discuss with us the topic today is what is public history. And I will talk with Thomas, who has writing, research, doing public history, and well, that's it, Thomas. Thank you very much. I have to say, I don't know if I said good morning, but good morning for people who are here in Brazil. Good afternoon for you, and maybe good evening, good night, and well, hello to people who will watch us later in any part of the world. That stuff that the internet and the English language to allows us to communicate with large audiences. Well, Thomas, I said too much. Now I have to pass the word for you. Thank you
Uh,
very much. Here, okay, okay.
no, thank you, Fabio. Obrigado. I'm sorry I don't speak Brazilian. I don't speak Portuguese, but I'm French, and English is a way for us to communicate. So I appreciate that you're talking with me in English. Um, so yes, public history. I think the first time I heard the name public history was in 2008. I was doing my PhD in Italy, and I was talking with a friend of mine, Serge Noiret, who is a big name in public history. He's Belgian, and he did a lot on digital history and public history. And we were having coffee in the morning, and I was telling him about my research on museums. And he told me, well, listen, Thomas, what you're doing is actually public history. And I didn't know what public history was, right? So I started to learn about public history. I started to understand that public history is what I would say actually it's making history more public, right? So I think it's history for a large public. So instead of historians writing for other historians, public history is making history for a large audience. So that could be, through museums, exhibitions. That could be history in the public space, in the streets. We work a lot with artists, for example. So history on the walls, uh, guided tours. So it's history for a broad public. I think it's also history with the public. And I must say that I went to Brazil once, São Paulo, and I learned a lot from people who do public history in Brazil. There are so many people who do public history in Brazil. You have the network, the Brazilian network of public history. You have many friends. I was just talking like 10 minutes ago to colleagues from France, and they were telling me that they've learned about public history in Brazil because they are doing something on the history of prison in France. And they were mentioning a colleague of us, Vivian Borges, in Brazil, who does history and prison. So you can see that there are connections. Brazil, France, I live in Luxembourg, and before I was the United States. So there's a international discussion about what's public history. So history for the public, history with the public. It means that historians work with different groups. They work with associations. They work with witnesses. Oral history is big in Brazil. I mean, we know about oral history in Brazil. It's big. And oral history is a form of doing history with the public, right? So that's very important for me. History for the public, history with the public, history in the public. Because when we talk to people who don't like history, they say, well, I remember my history classes at school. It was only dates, remembering dates, names. I hated history. And we think that history is more than that. History is about stories. It's about understanding, right? And it's history not only in school, not only in universities, but in the streets, right? At home, on TV, listening to podcasts as yours.
Yeah.
So I think public history is a broader vision of what history can be.
Yeah, I will ask you, for example, how can we as historians, and we can think about other areas that people research at the university, how we can do something with the public. And I would like add something which public, because, for example, people has right points of view, and I will explain this right, what I want to say with rights, because on the other hand, we have the wrong points. But what I mean with wrongs, for example, sometimes in our society, there are people who defend people like Mussolini, Hitler, and Stalin, well, individuals who murdered a lot of people. So, for example, are we going to work with someone who defends Mussolini?
Thank you, Fabio. That's it's an important question. I think the first part of your question is how to work with the public, and sometimes historians are not the most equipped people to work with people. If we think about anthropology is doing research with, among, but historians are usually more used to go to the archives to work about people who've been dead for a long time. But sometimes we work with people who are still alive. And I think sometimes it raises good questions. Sometimes it is a benefit. Sometimes it is difficult. And sometimes it's a benefit when we work with people. We hear stories. We hear personal understanding of the past, and we have people working with us to help having a richer history. Sometimes it's complex. And I think it is important to understand that participant must have an expertise, right? It's not like public history. Not everybody can do history. Not everybody has something important to say, and not everything is true, right? So it's something which public. The participant have to get some form of expertise. For example, you will not do all history with someone who was not there, right? So you need to find someone who was a witness, right? So those people have a form of expertise, a living expertise, because they're part of the neighborhood that you want to study. They're part of the event that you want to study. So, not everybody, it's not the public. It's someone who has something to say. Other people have an expertise, a technical expertise, right? For example, we can do the history of architecture with people who have an architectural background. So that makes perfect sense. What we're not looking to is we don't want opinion just to have opinion. Anyone can have an opinion about the past, right? And we know with social media that, everybody has an opinion, right? And I think that's the beauty of history. History can touch everybody. Everybody has a connection with history. So that's the beauty. History is a very popular topic. But the problem is that everybody thinks that they know about the past, right? Everybody has an opinion about the past. And that's, I think, where the difference between public history and opinion is. If you go to the cafe, everybody has an opinion about what happened in the 60s. That's not exactly what historians do. So I think it is very important to understand what expertise the people have. And also to understand that people, the public, are very often nostalgic about the past, right? They can be nostalgic, especially when we grow older. The older we are, the more maybe nostalgic we are about the past. Yesterday, we were talking about people in Romania or in Serbia who are nostalgic of dictatorship. Some people today are nostalgic about dictators, right? And they have this opinion.
Here the same. Here the same.
Yeah. I see you coming. Yes. So the question is not to say that everything is true. That's not right. But it means that with public history, we involve people with different expertise, sometimes different point of view, but based on sources, right? It's not opinion, right? So that's very important to keep this methodology of doing history with the public.
Great. And talking about something that you said about, for example, movies. We can say, for example, TV shows, movies, advertising, websites, companies. Some companies in their websites, they tells their history to the public, but it can be, or how it can be considered public history, because sometimes the movies they are not so. It's a little bit sensible to say some movies that are not art; they are just entertainment, and we can be censored. But some movies they don't they use history, but they don't have any kind of they are not worried about making mistakes and reverberate things that academic in the academical field people do not believe anymore and something like that. How can we look to these things that they are made to make money and using history?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Fabio, for the question. My first answer would be that we cannot judge movies as we judge books or articles. You will never be able to do in a movie what you can do in an article or in a history book. The format is too different. For example, movies, you don't have footnotes, you don't have resources, you don't have a bibliography. So we cannot expect a movie to be as academic as an article. Okay, so yes, that's obvious. But you have different levels. You have movies and movies. You have documentary and documentary. The documentary film, you have nonfiction, right? So in some documentary film, you can film where the events took place. You can show archives. You can show testimonies. So it's not because it's on screen that it's bad, right? So I don't consider the category of movies as one category. It is more or less public history. I think you can have good movies, even if there are some fictional movies, because the point is not necessarily to be as accurate as an article. The point is to make people think about the past. and to discuss more. Some movies, some TV shows have led to public discussions, or people want to know more about the past because they've, seen a TV show. So I have no problem with a TV show or a movie to be entertaining. I love to use entertainment for history. History can be fun. There is no necessary conflict, but it depends the level of uh, history that you can have in a movie. If it's completely untrue, you have different levels of true events and interpretation. If it's a detail or if the whole scenario is wrong, so I prefer thinking in terms of levels of public history in movies and what a movie can bring to the public debate.
Cool. And you said about your experience, and I would like to ask you, for example, the public history. We have a public history, like you said, in Brazil. You were talking with Serge in Italy. And how is the public history, for example, in Italy, in the United States, Brazil? Well, how the main subjects, for example, that people in the United States prefer, and which one in Brazil, in Luxembourg, and everything.
Well, I cannot. I mean, you know more about public history in Brazil. I mean, I've been to Brazil once, and I've read books about public history in Brazil, but I'm not an expert at all. What I would say, I've been inspired by public history in Brazil for at least two things. One is the connection between public history and oral history. Oral history in Brazil and how oral history and public history connect. That's been very inspiring for me. The second is the connection between public history and social justice, which is very big in Brazil, but in Latin America. I've been inspired by public history in Colombia and the peace process, public history in Chile, thinking about the dictatorship. So that's very inspiring. If I compare with other forms of public history, I would first say that there is no one definition of public history. If you talk to people in Japan, in Italy, in Kenya, in the United States, in Brazil, they may have different understanding of public history. So I think it's important to have different views about public history. Some people think that public history is more about communication. So we communicate history to the people. And I think that's something very important in France, for example. So that's where I'm from. So communicating history to the public. Public history could be also an academic field. I think in Japan, in some ways, it's very much university professors who study public history, who study the public. That's another vision of public history. Italy, for me, is one of the most important countries for public history because they have many networks of people in archives, in libraries, in the newspapers, in school, and they connect all those practices under public history. And I think they've been very successful in leading the field. They just published a code of ethics in public history. So what are good ethical practices in public history? And I think it is a very important document that I make my students read and discuss. But yes, you have different approaches of public history. Maybe I was working in the US before, in the United States, and I moved back to Europe. And if I would be overly simple, I would say that North Americans are maybe more practical projects about public history, while Europeans tend to be a bit more about the theoretical thinking about public history, where the Americans are more, hands-on and project-oriented. That's maybe a cliche, but there's a part of truth. So different approaches of public history. There is no one good vision. And what matters is for people in Brazil, in Luxembourg, in Japan, to connect and to discuss the big questions on how we do public history.
Could you tell us some examples, even practical examples for example, the United States that you experienced, that when you were there, you saw, or some projects there in Luxembourg, for example, and even so, the projects that you are working on right now?
Well, I can give you two examples. One is easy because I just came from that event. We had colleagues come from France coming to present their public history project. So it's still in my mind, so I can tell you about this. I think it's a very good project. It's a project about a former prison. So a former prison in France that has been turned into a space for collective interpretation. And what they want to do, so they are historians, but they are working with associations of former prisoners, former guards, to collectively do tours, to collectively collect oral history. So they work in tandem. They have one historian and one prisoner, and together they design the list of questions for oral history, and they do the interviews together. They collect the material together. So you have an historian and a prisoner, and sometimes they have different understanding, different questions, but together they collect archives, and together they give tours. So people visit the former prison, and they have two tour guides, one historian and one former prisoner, and they have different voices, and it works. And I was very impressed by this project because it forces historians to work outside of their comfort zone. Historians are used to go to the archives to control the narrative and to publish. Here, they're dealing with emotions. They can't control exactly everything. They have to work with prisoners to disseminate knowledge. And I think it's a very interesting project. So that's one example. Another example we're doing is we're working with a partner in the Caribbean, in Martinique, which is still part of France, but is coming from the colonial history of France. It used to be made with plantations, with people enslaved from Africa, but also from the Caribbean. And we're working with them on a participatory process to reinterpret the former slave cemetery, which has been abandoned. And the idea is to work with the locals to provide a framework for interpretation for the cemetery. So it's very much collaborative. I know very little about the local context, but I have some methodology for participatory interpretation, participatory collecting. And together we're going to develop this new interpretation site for the cemetery. So that's just the beginning, but we're working with local citizens, and the local citizens will decide about the project, not the historians. We're collaborating with them, but the local citizen group will decide. And I think it is important to share this authority, to share this how we take decisions.
And how did you select the public to work with?
Well, depends the topic. Sometimes the public chooses us, right? So sometimes an association come to see you and say, well, we need help. Could you work with us? So that's basically, I don't do it. I mean, I work with people who ask me to work with them. So that's one option. If not, we always try to build participation. When 15 years ago, when I was starting doing public history, I did a lot of mistakes. For example, I thought that because I will make a project open to the public, I would think that the public would come. But no, I mean, participation, you need to build participation. you need to have different levels of participation. What can people do? Can people just bring pictures? Can people help you asking questions? Can people interpret the archives? Can people communicate? So now I think more in terms of different tasks that participants can do. And I also adapt to what they want. So it's not only me telling the public what to do, but sometimes the public comes, well, I think we should do this. So we discuss, we agree or we disagree, and we have publics. It's not the public. We have different participants with different expertise. So it's not that much this big selection. It's who wants to take part in the project.
Wow, great. And something that people we have read about is this problem that the humanities are suffering right now. And not only people who do not trust, who prefer to trust in their opinions, not in the not believe, but on left behind what the academical research say. But on the other hand, we have some interest in history. Like you said, people who go to you, who's communicate with you the interest to do something in history. We have a lot of companies that they are using their history as a market strategy. I saw some insurance companies that, for example, from England, that they said, "Wow, while Mr. Cook was around the world, we were working, protecting his home, while Darwin was researching. We were protecting his books and something like that." We had a history channel that they TV on cable TV around the world. So how we can do an analysis of the situation that for one side, people are writing about humanities don't have the same credibility as before and the same interest, but on the other hand, we have this evidence. So how can we conciliate and interpret this thing?
Well, I don't know. That's a big question. I mean, that's an important question. I don't have one solution, because if I had a solution, I would fix it. But I don't have one solution. Maybe I have a few ideas. One is
Yeah, great. Some ideas, great.
One is, I think, this question of being popular. I think history is popular because it's usually accessible, right? People like history, or they can connect with history. People do a lot of genealogy, so people like to connect with the past. It's usually their past. So I think when we do public history, we can surf on that popularity. You have so many history YouTube channels, podcasts, so that's good. I mean, people are interested in public history or in history, so that's good. The problem is that very often history or the past is seen in a very simple way, in a sense that people want to have a simple view on the past. And historians are not always good with simple story. Historians, they love complex stories, because research, I mean, when you work 5-10 years on a topic, you have a lot of archives, and you know that the past is very complex, right? So when you work 10 years on a topic, you know it's complex. But historians are not very good at making their research simple. to people. And people want simple things. On social media, it's about the buzz. It's about being simple. It's about being efficient. In 5-10 seconds, TikTok videos. Historians are not good on TikTok, right? So the problem is that people are getting used to consume history in a very simple and fast way. People prefer looking at 5-10 minute YouTube videos than watching a 2-hour documentary. So I think the format is a problem. And doing public history, I think, forces us to think about how we can make our complex history accessible. Obviously, some formats are more difficult. 6 seconds on TikTok, it's complex, right? But you can either say, well, I'm an historian, no social media. I think there is no way we can make our research accessible to the public. So you can say, no, I'm not doing anything. Or you can try to find new format like podcast. I love podcast, and I think it's very good for students, history students, to not only to learn, but to communicate their work through podcast. I teach podcasting, so my students do a podcast, and they have to in 10 minutes to explain what before they had to write in essays, right? So it's very different, but I think it's a way for us to fight this absence of history when online, because people want to have very clear, very simple fact. And I think it's the same for companies. I don't have a rule. I will never work with them or them. I think it depends on the objectives. Some companies, they want to use history to make money. Some companies want to create their own archives. So some business, they need an archive and they need an archivist. Well, I have nothing against that. I mean, it's a form of doing history. The question is, what is the objective of the project? So I think it requires a lot of discussion between the historians or the students and the partner, sometimes even having a contract, a clear contract with what's the objective, what's the archives that you can access, or if the company tells you, well, not those archives, or you cannot tell that. So you need to clarify from the beginning what you can and cannot do, and then you decide if it's worth it or not. So I don't have a magical solution, but I think I have some ideas to make history more accessible, using new media, adapting your work, and having new skills. For example, what you do, Fábio, is also different than writing an article. If I ask my student to do what you do, they're going to have to learn to write a script for a podcast, or to be able to interview someone, or to speak online. So those are skills that you need to learn. It's not enough to be a good researcher, right? It's like teaching. I used to be a school teacher, and I remember that my first class, I entered the classroom as a teacher. I was not prepared because I had not been trained to be a teacher yet. And it was a very difficult moment, because I think I was a good researcher, but I was not a good teacher yet. And you have to become a good teacher. You have to learn. It's the same for public history. You can be a wonderful researcher, know everything about your topic, but you cannot speak to the public, or you cannot use visuals or objects. You need to learn to make history more public. Those ideas, I think, could help with the questions you asked.
Yeah, for sure. And I will ask you, first of all, tell us a little bit about the podcast and say to the public here, because people can listen later. And for example, someone who wrote something about, for example, using social media, the 10, 20 TikTok seconds to do history. Because, okay, a podcast 10 minutes, it's something that we can think about, even it's hard to do for historians, it's hard. But for example, 20 seconds, someone wrote something about that. You saw any article, someone, or in a book or a magazine, or I don't know where.
Mm. Well, first about the podcast. I like podcast as a way of teaching public history for two reasons at least. First, I think it gives students like a concrete final product. So instead of writing something for me, they have to produce an episode for a podcast that they can share with their friends, with their family. Usually we have at the end a collective showing in which together with the families, the friends, we listen to the podcast together. So I think it gives some pride to students who say, well, I've done history, I have something concrete that I can be proud of. So that's something that I like, having a tangible and public history product, let's call it this way. The second asset of podcasting is that it forces students to learn about public speaking. And it's very disturbing for students because they learn how to write. They don't really learn how to speak. And for example, the first time they try recording, they're always too fast. They speak too fast, right? And so what we do is we work with comedians from theater to give the students a few tips about breathing, about pace, about the vocality of their narrative. And I think it shows students that history is more than books. Books are important, but history is also visual. It's also voice. It's also the body. You have a lot, especially in Brazil, we had a lot of studies about the body and the performance to do public history. And that's not something very unusual for historians to think the body as a way to communicate experience, memories. So I think it is a good entry point for students to think beyond the writing. So that's about podcast. Now about TikTok, I think the first thing is that all media are different, right? If you talk about Facebook, it's not Instagram. If you talk about Instagram, it's not TikTok. So I think you need to understand first the audience, the public that you have, and why you're using Facebook and not TikTok. So I never impose a media, apart from the podcast, I never impose a media to the student. They have to choose a media according to their need. So they say, well, I'm going to use an online exhibition because this or that, or I'm going to use a podcast because this or that. So they need to choose. And some media are more difficult than others. And I think TikTok is a good example because in a few seconds, there is no way, well, it's very difficult to express the complexity of a topic of the past in 6 seconds. But I'm not saying we cannot use TikTok. And I can give you an example. TikTok can be a trigger to something. So it could be, for example, a museum that has an exhibition about pop culture, right, in the 60s. And they have TikTok dance reenactment. So 6 seconds in which some people reenact a dance from the 60s, from the 70s. And this leads to either objects, sources, or the collection. So obviously you cannot do a full history of pop culture on TikTok, but you can use TikTok to connect with other medium, an online exhibition. So you have the link. TikTok is a bit difficult because it's only using its own links and reference. But you can use transmedia, having different media for a project. So you can have, we do that here. We have a project about a transmedia project about the Luxembourgers who went to Brazil to set up a factory, right, in Minas Gerais. So it's about the connection between Luxembourg and Brazil. And the project is a web documentary. You have all history, you have mapping, you have podcasting. So you have different media on a project. So why not adding Instagram or TikTok to a broader project? So I'm not saying we cannot use TikTok. I'm just saying that it's a very specific media with some limitations.
Yeah, sometimes here we have some projects, not academical projects, but people who like history and then start to put old pictures of the city, old movies. For example, here I'm in Niterói, my city is on Rio de Janeiro state, but Rio de Janeiro city was the Brazilian capital until 1960. So there are a lot of pictures, old movies about Rio. So people like to put it on internet, and it's amazing. And I know a lot of people that they are not historians, but they like history, and they follow this page, and then they say to me, "Hey, look this old book that I saw," because of that. My friends know that I'm a historian, so it's nice because it's make history more close of the society. So it's a way that I have been seeing people using that. And in this world that we are living, how this digital stuff affected public history? Because you have the public history, the digital public history. So you could tell us a little bit about this difference between public history and digital public history?
Well, Serge Noiret is actually the expert in digital public history. He published with Herben Zaxma and Marc Thébault a book on digital public history. Here we have the Center for Contemporary and Digital History, that does both public history and digital history. Sometimes it's only public history. For example, we did a artistic history of the city on a wall in the street. There was no digital component. Sometimes it's only digital history. For example, you are creating data set of digitized newspapers for research. So there's little public component in there. The digital public history, I think, connects the public aspect of history with the digital tools. So that could be using digital tools to collect materials. So that could be crowdsourcing. We have a project in which we work with partners to collect family pictures about the topic. So the digital tools help collecting. The digital can also help the collaborative writing of history. I mean, if we all know Wikipedia, which is a debatable process, but the collective writing in Wikipedia is an example of how the digital can connect people in different parts of the world, writing, discussing about a topic. Another example are the video games. Video games are very popular. They are about the past. Very often they're not history, but they're about the past. But what's also very interesting are the forums, where the gamers, the video gamers, discuss about everything and sometimes about the history. And you have a lot of people who know a lot on those forums. Assassin's Creed and all the the video games that take place in the past, they have forums, discussion. Those, I think, could be forms of public history with some interaction with archives and other things. And finally, digital public history is making history accessible to possibly global audience. It's never that global, but it has the potential to make history free. So open access, and in different languages. Languages are very important, so not only English, but we do our website in at least 3 languages: English, French, German, sometimes Portuguese, because in Luxembourg you have 90,000 Portuguese speakers from Cape Verde, from Portugal. It's like almost 20% of the population who speak Portuguese in Luxembourg. And so we need to have more website contents also for the Portuguese speakers. So the digital has this capacity to have automatic translation, which is very difficult when you do something physical in a museum. To have the text in 5 languages, it's very difficult. But online, we have automatic translations and we have different pages. So the digital tools can help sometimes to make history more accessible, more engaging. And as I said, sometimes transmedia. You have a podcast, you have TikTok, you have a map. And I think that's one big asset of digital public history.
Yeah, we are talking about that, and you said something about this. We are in this. We are talking about the digital world. So, but for example, we saw a lot of articles, books about public history, but most of them, I believe most of them, but I believe a lot of them are about. They don't think too much about writing as a public history, because we have the academic text with the footnotes and all this stuff, and we can write, for example, 3 pages to the public in a magazine, or we can write a book to a large audience. And so what public history are thinking about this book stuff, article stuff, in this world that we are writing, that we can write and people can read?
No, you're right. Since public history is also about communication, writing is important. Writing is not the only one. As I told you, I think that public speaking is also very important. Storytellers, our grandparents sharing stories, that's important. But writing is still important. But what I think is important in public history writing is first the level of publicness. How to write. For example, you write very differently an article from a blog, or an article or a text for a museum. So students need to learn to understand the publicness of what they write. So I often make them compare the first page of an academic journal article with an article in the newspaper or a text from a museum, and they see the different words that people use, the length of the sentences. I don't know about Brazil, but I think the French are very notorious to have long sentences, sometimes 3-4 lines for one sentence. That's not very public friendly. So we teach.
Here a lot of our history we have influence from France. So it's too close. It's the same, but very close way of think.
So you understand what I'm saying, and so we also discuss with students how to avoid jargon, so very difficult word that you could replace by something more simple, having short sentences, different. So the style of how you write is important. That's why we also write working with journalists to help us training students to be more efficient, to be more public in their writing. But again, it also depends the space of where you're writing. If you write in a newspaper, it's very different than if you write for in a museum. For example, the first panel in a museum, you may have some text, but I tell my students that instead of 400 words, they have 75 words to explain the topic, because long text in the museums don't work. So they need short, accurate text for the museum. Same for labels. So what you write and how you write depends the format. If you're writing online, for example, you need to learn about web writing, hyperlinks, and how you connect your writing with other web resources. Where do you put the picture on your blog? So all those things that are about communication, but they have an impact on how you tell history.
Yeah, I already wrote some articles to. There was, for example, in Brazil, a magazine from National Library, and they sell it to large public, and they gave a lot of numbers of the magazine to schools, and then they sent to us, to the people who would write to the magazine, the instructions. So a lot of things not go too long in academical text, and so the historians use it to write there. 99% of the articles were made by historians, but they gave to us the instructions, because it's too different, and they started something like, hey, to write to this kind of magazine, it's not an academical text, so we have to go through this way, and then and it was, I don't remember, but I believe this magazine was about 10 years in Brazil, but in about 10 years ago, things changed a lot here, and then the magazine ended their work. So I would like to ask you another thing, this local stuff, the local that in public history people use it to work with. Could you tell us a
Local,
little
you
bit?
mean in Luxembourg?
No. The local concept in public history, too. In a global world, you have the local stuff. How can we work with this stuff? A lot of texts about public history say about that. So, how can we be local in this global stuff, in this global world?
Well, there are multiple answers. I think one is what we are doing now. You and me talking. We understand each other. We have a common topic. We have a common interest. I don't know much about Brazil. You don't know much about Luxembourg, but we can still talk about similar questions, and we understand each other. So I think that the first thing about public history is that it's not a topic. It's a way of doing history. So you can talk with someone in Japan, with someone in Algeria, someone in Canada, about how we do history. And they can talk about podcasting. You will know everything about social media. So I think the global is a global question about how we do history. So we understand each other. When you go to a public history event, you often have people with different expertise of different topic. The Renaissance in Italy, the medieval history, or the Second World War, and they can talk, for example, about communication of history. So I think the first thing is this global question. Then the local and the global. That's a good question. With Serge Noiret, a couple of years ago, we wrote an article about international public history, And Serge used the concept of glocal, the connection between the local and the global. We can debate the concept, but what I think is important for historians is to replace the stories, the personal memories, the personal object into a broader context. Everybody, I mean, when they remember the past, they have their stories. But what historians can bring is a context. What does that story, that object, that picture, what does it mean in a broader context? So that could be you're telling me about your past, and then we contextualize in the natural history of Brazil, or we can go even further and talk about global phenomenon. And I think that's what historians can bring to people who have memories. That's very good, but they need this broader understanding so that your story can be understood by someone else. So I think the job of the historians is to make the local history or the individual history accessible, understood to a national or even global public.
Yeah, and this thing to write about public history in English, in Spanish, in Portuguese, in French, the importance of that. Could you tell us a little bit?
Well, the first thing is when you so public history is the name in English, but when you try to translate in different languages, sometimes it's difficult. In Brazil, I think you translate Historia Pública. The French, they translate because they like everything in French, so they say Histoire publique. But the Japanese, the Italians, they don't translate. The Italians, for example, the name of the association is the Associazione Italiana di Public History. Because if they translate public history in Storia Pubblica, in Italian it doesn't make sense. And it's the same in Japanese. The name public, you can't really translate public. It's very difficult. So that shows you that first, the very name public history is understood differently in because of the language, right? So that's quite important. The second thing is that we do need resources, discussion in other languages. A lot has been written about public history in English, but we need books, we need discussions in Brazilian, in Italian, in Polish, in Japanese, because it also connects with the local practices. And in Luxembourg, it's very difficult if I meet with an association, a local association, I'm not going to give them a book in English because they may not read English and they may not understand the example that are in the United States. So we need books or article either in Luxembourgish or in French. And I think that's the same in Brazil. You need, and you have many books like Public History in Brazil that I've been using for years. You need books in different languages because that creates debate, discussion, and that also avoids to simply reusing the North American examples. Because if you only use books in English, well, the problem is that you always use the same examples from England, Australia, the United States, and they are good projects. But if you also have books in Spanish, then you understand the discussion about the Civil War in Spain and how memory, history, law has been very big in Spain. Same in Italy, you mentioned Mussolini and the discussion about the nostalgia, about the past. You have to write about it in Italian too. So I think it's very important to have resources in different languages, and that's why the International Federation for Public History was created in 2011 with people from all around the world. Many Brazilians, Anita Lucchesi used to be in the steering committee of the International Federation. So that connects people from all over the world, and I think that's important.
Could you tell us a little bit about this process that public history left to be something from the Anglo-Saxon worlds to more international, this process?
Hmm? Well, the first people, I mean, not the first people, but because public history as a name has been used in the 19th century. So people were using public history in the 19th century, but in a different meaning. But in the 1970s, the terms public history became a bit more popular in the United States. So it got developed in the United States in the 1970s and so on. But because it was in English, most of the people using the term public history in the 1980s, 1990s were from English-speaking countries. So Australia, a little bit of England, Canada, United States, but that was pretty limited. And in the year 2000s, 2010s, I think some people outside the English-speaking world, Serge Noiret being one of them, discovered that public history is not only from the United States. It's a set of practices that people have been doing. They were not using the term public history. It's the same in Brazil. I mean, people have been doing public history for decades. You didn't call it public history or historia pública. So I think people understood that they can use the term, they can translate histoire publique, historia pública, and it was useful because when you use public history, I think you connect different people with different profiles: archivists, librarian, tour guides. So public history is a concept, a practice that can connect people with similar questions. And so people in Europe, in Latin America, I mean, there are people trying to have a Latin American Association of Public History. You have courses in Buenos Aires, in Santiago, in Bogota. So you have a lot in Ecuador. Now you have people who do and use the term public history in South Africa, in Kenya, in India, in Indonesia. And I think it's not using the North American concept. It's people finding their own practice or definitions of public history. So it's not imposing a model. It's people saying, well, we want to make history more public, and we do it this way or this way. So it's not simply one model. You don't have one model of public history. You have different practices, but people can still talk because the same questions emerge. How to make history more public, accessible, and participatory.
And I don't know if it's possible, but something like which topics people in public history prefer to study?
So, prefer to what?
Yeah, prefer to study, to research, to work with.
Well, again, that depends where you are and depends your objective. Some people want to study public history. Some people want to use public history to change things. So activism as a way of acting on the present, changing things. For some people, it's very important. Other people say, well, no, I want public history just to communicate my work. And I'm not saying what's better. I'm just thinking that people can choose what they want to do with public history. So it's very important to ask people why they're doing public history, because that tells you a little bit more about the type of practice that they want to do or don't want to do.
And we can, for example, export public history to another areas of the knowledge, like economics, accounting, actual science, anthropology, and well, any other areas?
Well, first, I think it existed before in those disciplines. If you talk to anthropologists about public history, they're going to say, "Well, of course, we've been doing that for." I mean, the whole principle of anthropology is this research in the community. So they would be, yeah, of course. I think it also connects to a broader process, the process of science communication. So, which is not only about history, it's also about art sciences, mathematics. I was watching a video the other day about public mathematics, in which mathematicians try not to tell people mathematics, but why mathematics matter, right? So the field of science communication is broader than history. It's about bringing science to the public. And I think in the context, especially in the United States, where there is mistrust about science, it's very important than scientists, that researchers do an even better job at communicating science, so that some people, like the president of the United States, does not attack as he does the very concept of science. So his public history is only one tiny aspect of a broader discussion on knowledge production.
And in this world that we have the ER, the artificial intelligence, so what public history are thinking about it?
Well, I don't know. We have a lot of colleagues here who are interested in artificial intelligence, because that's part of, I think it's part of the impact of technology on how we produce knowledge or communicate in everyday life. So AI is, if you do the long history of technology, it's about radio, television, internet. I think AI is one evolution of how the technology affects or helps history communication. So I'm not opposing AI to history. I think I'm replacing AI in a long history of technology. Now, what public history can do with AI, I think the first reflex for historians is to criticize AI for doing things that historians should do. So, for example, when AI, artificial intelligence, is used to create historical poster or historical fake images, I think historians are, very, very, very critical, and they should. But I think there are also ways to work or to teach with AI. I'm not saying that every student should use ChatGPT to do their homework, but they're using ChatGPT anyway, right? So we need to find ways to include critical use of ChatGPT and critical use of AI in how we do research, because AI is very useful for data mining, for representation of research. So there are ethical ways of using AI, which is not the simplistic use of AI to get you easy answer. We go back to what people want. They want simple and fast answers, right? Kids, they have a homework, they have a question, they use ChatGPT. I think our job is to show how you can use in a critical way and responsive way AI for some objectives.
Yeah, I was thinking about. I will send to you later because this year is the uh, 200 years of the independence of Uruguay, and I studied my PhD thesis is from this separation between Uruguay and Brazil. So the independence war of Brazil in Uruguay before this war. So the Uruguay government to do the commemoration of this independence of Uruguay from Brazil, they did some movies, 3 minutes like that with AI, artificial intelligence. AI is in Portuguese, artificial intelligence, and with and reconstructed history with artificial intelligence. There was a debate there, people who didn't like, but I guess it's something interesting. So I will send to you. It was really nice in my point of view, of course. But for to ask your final thoughts, I have to say to the public, because this activity, it's activity from the university, from UF. So we have a kind of way. We have a way to people who are watching us confirm their presence here. So I will send the link in the chat to people confirm their presence here. But before that, or while I'm sending the link to the public, I will ask you your final thoughts.
Me?
To end our conversation, what or final considerations, final thoughts, what would like to say to the public, to us, to finish our conversation?
Well, it's a difficult question. I think I like to finish on a positive note. I'm trying to be a positive person, and I think public history is difficult because it's not only using archives. It's also working with different people, different groups, communicating with very different publics. So it is difficult. But I think one quality of asset of public history is to be problem solving. When we do public history, we have many problems, but we are trying to solve problems, right? To be this very positive, flexible, remain critical, yes, but also very flexible, positive in the sense that we're gonna find solutions to work together. We can be critical. We may have things that we don't accept, but we're gonna do it. We're gonna produce something together, and we're gonna engage with the public. So I always tell my students to remain positive and to not give up when they have problems, and to try to solve problems one by one, and avoid this feeling of failure. It's not about failure. You don't fail. You try, you produce something, you can improve, but don't think in terms of success or failure. Try to think in terms of process. I will try, I will do my best, and I will solve problems. So I would like to remain positive with public history.
Great, Thomas. I have to say thank you to the public, people who are de nada. And also, valeu. Tchau, tchau.
Thank you.
Goodbye.